King Archibald was a pompous man. He loved himself very much. He loved his fancy clothes, his sparkling jewels, and most of all, he loved being king. But King Archibald had a problem. His people weren't impressed by him. They thought he was a bit of a joke, with his silly strut and his crown that was always a little bit crooked. One day, King Archibald had a grand idea. "I shall build a magnificent arch," he declared to his court. "An arch so tall, so grand, that my people will be awestruck by my greatness." The court, used to the king's outlandish ideas, nodded politely. Nobody dared tell the king that an arch wouldn't change their minds about him, and so the king, puffed up with pride and self-importance, ordered the construction to begin. The king imagined himself riding triumphantly beneath the arch, his people cheering, his heart swelling with pride. He could already picture the paintings and statues that would immortalize this moment, his grand arch a testament to his reign. Oh yes, King Archibald was a man of simple pleasures, easily satisfied by the most obvious displays of grandeur, or so he thought. The master builder, a nervous fellow with a twitchy moustache, got to work. He measured and calculated, drew and redrew, all under the watchful and rather impatient eye of the king. Finally, the day arrived when the arch was complete. The king, in his finest robes and shiniest crown, arrived for the grand opening. The trumpets blared, the drums rolled, and the king, with a self-satisfied smirk, approached the arch on his royal steed. There was just one small problem. The arch was, well, it was a bit of a disappointment. In fact, it was so low that the king bumped his head on the underside as he tried to ride through. The crown tumbled off his head, landing in the mud with a squelch. The crowd gasped. Then someone giggled. Soon everyone was laughing, the sound echoing around the square. The king's face turned the color of a particularly ripe tomato. "Who is responsible for this fiasco?" the king roared, his voice trembling with fury. The master builder, shaking like a leaf in a hurricane, pointed a trembling finger at the stonecutter. "It's his fault, your majesty! He cut the stones too short." The stonecutter, pale and sweating, hastily blamed the apprentice. "I was following the apprentice's measurements, your majesty. He wrote them down wrong." The apprentice, a scrawny lad with ink stains on his trousers, looked like he might faint. He stammered and pointed a finger at the king's advisor. "The advisor told me the wrong dimensions, your majesty. He said the king wanted a shorter arch," he blurted out. Now it was the advisor's turn to tremble. He had indeed told the apprentice the wrong measurements. He'd misheard the king, who mumbled when he was thinking about how magnificent he was. Section 4, the King's Comeuppance. The advisor, desperate to save his own skin, decided to tell the truth. Well, a version of it. "Your Majesty," he began, bowing so low his forehead almost touched the muddy ground, "I believe there has been a misunderstanding. You see, I relayed your vision precisely. You desired an arch that reflected your humility, a symbol of your willingness to be closer to the people." The crowd, who had been enjoying the spectacle immensely, murmured amongst themselves. "Closer to the people, the king, who barely acknowledged their existence," the advisor continued, his voice smooth as silk. "The arch, your majesty, is a testament to your desire to be on the same level as your loyal subjects. A stroke of genius, if I may say so myself." The king, of course, knew this was all a load of poppycock, but he was in a pickle. To admit the truth, that he, the king, had miscalculated, was unthinkable. So he did what any sensible, rational, and completely innocent monarch would do. He declared in a voice dripping with false humility, Yes, of course, that was my intention all along. This arch represents my deep and abiding love for my people." The crowd was not buying it. They began to murmur again, this time with less amusement and more anger. The king, sensing the shift in mood, decided to cut his losses and make a dignified exit, or at least as dignified an exit as a king with a mud-stained behind and a missing crown could make. But it was too late. The people, tired of his arrogance and lies, had had enough. They stormed the platform, captured the king, and threw him in the dungeon. The next day, King Archibald was found guilty of being a pompous fool and a terrible king. And so he was sentenced to the rather unfortunate fate of having his head chopped off. Section 5, a Melon on the throne. The people, now without a king, gathered in the square, wondering what to do next. A jester, known for his sharp wit and even sharper tongue, stepped forward. He held aloft a large, ripe cantaloupe. "Behold," he announced, his voice echoing through the square, "I give you King Cantaloupe." The crowd, initially stunned into silence, burst into laughter. King Cantaloupe. The very idea was absurd. But the more they thought about it, the more appealing the idea became. After all, a cantaloupe couldn't be any worse than their previous ruler. Section 6. Long live King Cantaloupe. And so it was that the kingdom found itself with a most unusual monarch. King Cantaloupe, perched precariously on a velvet cushion atop the throne, presided over the land. Of course, King Cantaloupe didn't do much ruling. It couldn't exactly issue decrees or command an army, but that, it turned out, was a good thing. With King Cantaloupe on the throne, the people learned to govern themselves. They formed councils, held debates, and made decisions together. And slowly the kingdom, once ruled by a pompous king and his ridiculous whims, became a happier, more prosperous place. The moral of the story? Be careful what you wish for, especially if it's a really low arch.